Hi everybody, this is Nathan. This video is for people who were unable to attend the workshop for the Sydney Comics Guild this week on Saturday, or anyone who cares about coloring comic style in Photoshop and hasn't found the other far better videos out there already. What we've got here, I've got CS6, Photoshop CS6 open here. The tutorial originally was in CS5 at the Guild meeting, but the stuff I'm doing makes no difference at all because this kind of stuff has been in Photoshop since the CS line began, I believe. It might even be in Elements, so nothing too tricky here. What I've got is a flattened image of some black and white line art, and you will notice that it's completely flat. There's no separation of the line and background, which is the first thing I'm going to take care of. Resolution is not a big deal for this particular demo. You probably want to work at print resolution for your final colors, though, just because increasing them is going to give you some bad banding and haloing for any kind of blends you might have or gradients. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is separate this line art from the background so we can color under it. What I'm going to do is just unlock the background layer. The quickest, easiest way I know how to do that is double click it and then save it as layer 0, which means it's now an editable layer. You could also duplicate it and delete the original. This is just a little faster. Alright, so we've got an editable layer we can grab. I'm going to select color range. In this case, the color I want is white. And I've got fuzziness turned up all the way, so I'm going to get as much of the white as possible. At the very inside of these lines, there's going to be a tiny little halo of white around the edge where it anti-aliases. You can tell from the scan. This was inked in Manga Studio, but it was saved as raster at a lower resolution, so you get a little edge of fuzziness here, but we're going to be able to fix that. It's no big deal. And if you notice, if you zoom out to 100%, you can't even really see it. Okay, so we've got the white selected, fuzziness up all the way. You hit OK. So now we have everything white selected, everything black is not selected. Just hit delete that. I'll just go up here and edit clear. You can also hit the delete key. This is a PC version of Photoshop I'm using here. The controls on the Mac will be slightly different only because of the keystrokes. Everything else will be the same. There might be a little bit of difference in the menus, but otherwise the procedure works exactly the same for Mac, so don't worry about that. Alright, so now we've got, in theory, we've got black line art and a clear background, which is pretty good. This scan's already been cleaned up. You may find that you have to do a little cleanup before you can do this. What you might have to do when you first bring your scan in is go to Image Adjustments and either convert it to black and white or go to Levels, perhaps. Squeeze all the levels down to 1 so that there's just pure black and white. And then you'll find a much cleaner image to do what I just did and delete the white background. There are lots of ways to do that also. But mostly you just want to try to get the best clean scan you can and then tweak it in Photoshop until it's all black or white, then remove the white. Okay, so now we've got a clear layer, line work. Let's put some color under it. Start a new layer here, put it underneath. I'm just going to go ahead and rename layer 0 inks so I know what it is. Layer 1 will be, we're going to call that flats, because the first layer of color you put down is always just a flat color shape to define an area, so that you can add tones and texture on top of that if you need be. Okay, so I'm going to use the magic wand tool here. I'm going to turn off anti-aliasing, try to get as much of that haloed edge around the lines gone as possible. I'm going to leave contiguous on because I don't want to select everything that's not got pixels in it at this point, because that would be everything except the lines again. Now I'm just going to select, I did the sweater during the first workshop. I think for this I'm just going to do the hat. A little easier to look at, a little closer to work with. Alright, I'm selecting the fabric of the hat, and that's pretty much one piece. I don't see any major holes. Okay, go back to flats where I want to fill it in. I'm going to pick a color. How about something blue? Edit, fill, use foreground color. Boom. Look at that, blue. So you notice you get this haloing here. That's what I was talking about before. The edges were not all the way selected because the black lines were fuzzed a bit because of Photoshop. Now how you avoid that, we'll just step back or two before I filled it, is you make your selection slightly larger. Select, modify, expand. These lines are fairly fine, so I'm not sure how much I can expand it without dropping some of the lines out, but we'll do 2 pixels and see how it goes. Okay, and then to check your results, you can always hit Q for quick mask, which will show you everything that's not pink is selected. So if you zoom in, you got a little selection here on the edge of the badge. That probably should clean up. There's a little bit here needs to be cleaned up. And when you're in quick mask mode, you can paint with black and white, probably with a different brush than the chalk brush. Something with hardness. Okay, something much smaller than that. Okay, so if you just paint with black and white, if you use black, it selects, or rather deselects that area, making it pink. And if you go with white, you can effectively add to your selection by removing the deselection, like that. What we want to do is to clean up the selection edge here so that the badge is more fully selected. Because we're going to do a separate color for that. And clean up the edge of the hat here so it doesn't slip into the background. Where that line was super thin, when we expanded the selection, it moved over an 8 into it, as you can probably tell. Okay, a little bit more here. This won't be, obviously this won't be perfect. I would advise you to take the time to get the best possible selections you can, because your flats are everything when it comes to this thing. Everything you do in coloring and comic book style like this is going to revert back to your flats. Your flat will be the sort of the master template for the item that you're coloring. So best to have the best possible selection to start with. I just realized I have opacity set to brush pressure. I'm using a tablet here. If you can use mouse from almost all of this. You don't actually need pressure sensitivity unless you're blending colors or doing subtle shading, which we'll come to in the tones part of this discussion in just a minute. But at the moment, a mouse would have actually been better because it wouldn't have pressure sensitivity, and I wouldn't have had these soft, fuzzy selection edges. See how you get the soft edge selection? I needed a hard selection like that. But we fixed it now, so it's fine. Alright, so that's more or less what I wanted selected. Go out of quick mask mode again by hitting Q. And let's try that fill again. Edit, fill, foreground color. I filled it on the wrong layer. This kind of stuff happens to me all the time. Alright, so yeah, make sure you're on the right layer. One way to avoid this is when you go to your inks, lock the layer. Then you can't do that again. And there'll be some more of that later on. It's a little bit, you might want to lock that anyway just in case. Foreground color. Okay, I know people are probably watching this at this point and thinking, this is really basic stuff. But if you're not familiar with Photoshop, this kind of stuff is weird and it's not very intuitive, so any little bit I can do to help, I'll try to do. Alright, so now we've got a flat for the hat, which is good. I'm going to go into the badge now, and I think the quickest way to do that is going to be to do a quick mask again. To do that, you'll need a selection. So let's just start with what we can grab. Hold down Shift to select multiple areas with the wand tool. Of course, there'll be tons of holes in this, but that's okay. I'm going to put another flat layer in here for that. I'll call it badge flat. I guess in that case I should probably change this to hat flat, because I like rhyming. Okay, so now we're on badge flat. Go to quick mask mode again with Q. I'm going to fix all this rigmarole here. Right to erase and select inside here. You notice that I'm selecting the line work as well as the background area. It doesn't matter because we're going to be throwing in color underneath the line work, so that's actually preferable because that way you don't have any edges blending like the haloing like we had before. You know for sure that if you see the black line work, you're not getting any fuzziness. And again, I'm zoomed way in here. This image would probably be the size of a panel in most comic books, so you don't have to be super careful with it. And some people do off registration colors on purpose, like for fun. That kind of stuff can work really well. Okay, got this quick mask off again. Back to a better selection. We're going to do the same thing we did before, just pick a different color. Do kind of Flintstones with it, I guess, and just do a yellow color. Okay, so now you've got a flat for the badge. Apply for the hat, and your line work. So next thing you probably want to do is add some tones to that. For traditional comic stuff, you're probably just going to need 3 layers of tone: shadow, mid-tone, which is this color, and highlight. And you can do these in shades of gray and manipulate them in Photoshop to add to your color. But usually what I like to do is work with a darker and lighter version of the same color. Or if you want to get crazy painterly with it, you can do complements of this color to get shadows and complementaries also to do light highlights. It gets really deep into color theory that I don't fully understand, but there are ways to use the complements and shadows to make it seem even more rich and more realistic lighting. But this is a comic book, and not only that, but a relatively crudely drawn comic book. So I'm just going to go with 2 tones lighter and darker the original color. Okay, now we need to make sure that we're going to paint on the inside the colors we have selected already. So when I go in to put highlights or whatever on the badge, I don't want to affect the hat, and likewise. So what I'm going to do is, for that instance, I need this to be masked. The quickest, easiest way in this case to do it is to turn on lock transparent pixels. And what that does is any pixel that doesn't have color information in it, meaning pretty much everything that's not yellow in this case, because I'm on the badge flats layer, will be locked. I can't draw on it, I can't paint on it, I can't do anything. So if I grab what I'm going to use for shadowed color here, let's say that, and I draw and scribble everywhere around here, I can't do anything with it. Nothing happens. But as soon as you go inside the badge, then you can draw or paint, whatever it is you're doing. Now there are lots of methods to get your tone in here. Some people would use just a standard brush, pressure sensitivity, and just take off what I've done. It's a pretty small area. Okay, so if you use just a standard brush, pressure sensitivity turned on, and bring it up large, make sure the hardness is way down, you get sort of a soft airbrushy type effect, which is good for broad areas if you don't want anything too sharp. But in this case, this is supposed to be metallic, so that won't work too well for that. So what I'm going to do is the same technique, just bring the hardness of the brush up quite a bit and possibly shrink it down. Again, the aesthetic we're working with here is very cartoony, so it doesn't have to be terribly realistic. In fact, that would look out of place in this kind of image, I think. And that's not just because I think the image is bad. But okay, so you can paint in your shadows. And you have control over it the same way you would any other brush in Photoshop, which is quite useful. And then you can do highlights the same way. I'm going to select that mid-range color back again with this eyedropper tool, which I'm using in conjunction with the brush tool simply by holding down Alt and clicking. So now I have the color from the mid-tone again. Anything I just sampled, you can also do that by just clicking on the eyedropper tool, picking a color, and then going back to brush. But the Alt key is faster. And I want a lighter tone of that, so just bring it up. And then just color in a lighter tone. Again, remembering that you're using a brush, so you can, all the techniques of brush afford you: size, pressure, variation, flow, all that stuff's available. In this case, fairly simple. I just want to demonstrate some tone variation here. Okay, so you can do it that way. Now the hat, I'm going to do slightly differently because I want to demonstrate another more flexible method of the same thing. Again, I'm going to lock transparent pixels, but in this case, I'm also going to duplicate the layer by dragging it down to the new layer icon. You can also right-click on it and hit duplicate layer. And then I'm going to select. Actually, in order to get rid of those pixels, well, one is a selection of that blue with no pixels on it. So I'm going to select all, remembering transparent pixels are locked. And then I go edit clear, and you can't see any difference because we're not looking at that layer. But if I turn off the hat flat copy now has nothing in it. And as far as I know, that's still Yeah. See, now the lock transparent pixels has eliminated any pixels on there at all, so you can't really draw on it at all. So we can do it the other way. Step backward. I say the other way like it's the only other way to do it, but Photoshop gives you probably dozens of options to do anything in the program. Okay, so we're back to the point where we have two versions of the hat color. And what we do this one is go to Image Adjustments, Hue and Saturation. I'm going to go ahead and get the highlight tone I want. Something brighter, maybe slightly less saturated and lighter, like that. For comparison, that's the original color. That's the highlight color. And you say to yourself, well, what are you going to do now? You're going to go in and erase this stuff out? You can do that, but the easier way and more control way is to add in, oops, wrong button, a layer mask. And that's the little icon here that looks like a layer with a hole in the middle of it. And what a layer mask will give you is the ability to selectively erase out parts of a layer, and yet it remains editable. So I want to put those parts back. And like most masks in Photoshop, the quick mask included, it uses black and white for this. Black will erase parts of your mask away. White will restore them. And remember, mask in this case is the screen through which the highlight is being translated to the hat flat. So what we want to do is take black, basically break it down to this. Take the black paintbrush on your mask. Make sure you don't have your layer selected like that. You want your mask selected. And just start carving out parts you don't want to be highlighted. In essence, you're doing the shadows now, or as much of the hat as you don't want to be lit up. And again, same options. You're still using the brush, so you make it as soft or as sharp as you like. Don't even worry about getting it accurate the first time through, because obviously I want to go in and put highlights on all those little wrinkles and folds, but I don't have to do it all at once. Get a general feel for it. The different layers of transparency here too. You notice that one stroke isn't quite enough. Go back. Bring the size down to keep the softness there. Now leave the highlights in. We'll put the highlights back in this case, like so. You can even add elements to a drawing, of course, since you're using the highlights here. Like I could add in an extra area of highlight here if it felt like it. If I wanted to add texture through lighting, this would be a way you do it. You're probably going to want to establish your lighting source before you can get to this point, unless you use a very open ink line style. If you use any line weight at all, you'll have already defined your light source most likely. You want to make sure that your colors work with your line weights to give them the most possible benefit. This is a bit of a hack job because I'm trying to do it quickly, and I just want to show you the technique. And I'm not that good, so. Okay, so you have highlights, you have a midtone. Let's do the same thing. Duplicate this whole layer with this mask. And in fact, let's rename it so I don't forget what it is. Hat High. That's the hat highlights, which means that this layer we're about to use, I'm going to call Hat Shade. Would be the shadows. And you're saying to yourself, well, I've got this light color there. How can we do that? Well, the first thing we need to do is get rid of that mask, because the shadows and the highlights are not going to share the same space. So you grab this, select all, right? You can either hit Control All or just go to Edit, select all, okay? Fill with white. Okay, and in that case, the mask is completely filled again. or completely open in this case, meaning the blue translates all the way through. Okay, that's what you wanted. So now we get back to the main layer. We're going to do an adjustment again. Do saturation. I'm going to make it still blue, but of course quite a bit darker blue. And these aesthetics I'm picking here are mostly just for visibility. I know they don't look that great, but I'm trying to get them to show up on the screen. Because I don't know what YouTube's going to do to this thing, so I'm trying to make it as concise as possible. Okay, so there's something that passes for a shadow color. Again, back into the mask. Grab black and start taking stuff away. You can either repaint your highlights in this case, or select all, edit, fill with white again. Or you can do it what I'm trying to do. Select all, edit, fill with black. And what that'll do is completely block out the shadows. So now we're going to be able to paint in just where we want the shadows to go by putting black holes in that mask. You'll notice that because we're using a soft brush on the mask, we're actually getting a little bit of color blending between the shadows, the midtone and the highlights, which is good. You want that to sort of go together, I think. You don't have to go crazy with the rendering. A lot of modern comics, I think, probably go a little far with the color rendering. It's just my personal opinion, but I think they're going for a little too much visual punch. And it just hurts everything. Besides, as I keep referring to, this is not really that good a comic picture. Okay, so you get the idea. Some shadow, some highlights on your midtone. And this can take as long or be as quick as you need it to be to get what you need on the page. I was mentioning texture before, and if I wanted to put, like, say, a scene or something like that, say some kind of crazy dot pattern that ran through the stitching of the hat, you could do that, and you go back to this one, and you'll want to punch through more of that. So there's highlights around it. I want to take the hardness up for that one. And small brush. So these will be like tiny little micro highlights. See, these elements, you can add elements entirely independent of your inking if you decide to. Just be careful how far you take that, because as you can tell, it doesn't blend in terribly well. In fact, I'm going to get rid of it here. First on the highlight layer. Which is pretty hacky anyway. And then back on the shade layer. Oops. Swap back. If you are using a tablet, remember when you have pressure sensitivity set and when you don't, because I mess up on that like every time, and it's frustrating. Okay, again, everything I've done so far except for the color blending here you can do with the mouse pretty much just as easily. There's also another technique that's commonly used in superhero comics a lot of modern comics use this. It's just a way of getting tones on there it's called cuts, and it works something like this. You've got your flat. I've just turned off those two layers, the highlights and shadow I already did. You've got the flat here. You've got the layer you're going to put your, let's say, highlight on. And what you want to do is, using Alt again, I'm going to select midtone and the midtone again. So I've got midtone for foreground and background color here. Pick one of them, make it a little lighter, so you can use it light to dark, and the dark will be the same as the background here. And you want to use that for a gradient, which in this case in CS6 you can find it hiding along with the paint bucket tool. I think it's the same in CS5 and probably for most of them. If you've had trouble finding it, either go to Window and select it, under Tools, or you can just hit G in most cases, and that'll bring it up. And what you're going to do is now you're going to make a selection on this empty layer here. I could mask this layer out and everything or select it here, but I'm just going to draw it by hand because it's just as fast. Okay. Oh, I still got everything selected. So I just hit deselect here, Control D, because I still have the entire thing selected. You couldn't see it. Again, quick way to tell if you've got anything selected, hit quick mask. If you get a warning tone and no pink, then you don't have anything selected. Okay, so I'm drawing a quick little selection here. Alright, so there's a shape. You grab gradient tool, just drag it from one side to the other, and that's obviously not going to work because that's not the right gradient. When you grab the gradient tool for the first time, it's going to default to whatever you used it for last. You're probably going to want to go in there and make sure you select this one, which will be whatever your foreground color and background color are as a gradient, which is exactly what we want. Okay, so let's do this. I've got it backwards. You can either flop it, so I'm going to do it a few times anyway, so it doesn't matter. I'll just do it in reverse. You have the highlight on this end, so you go like that. Perhaps something like this. You have to play with it a little bit. But in the publishing world, especially for independent or second-tier comic companies that need to turn stuff out really fast and don't have all the manpower, this is still one of the preferred methods of coloring comics that I've been told of, because it's quick, mostly. And if I want to show what that looks like without the marching ants, you can just turn off extra so you can't see it. So you end up with, you can get a fiddly edge here, but mostly you get a nice transition from your light tone down to your dark. It makes things look a little shiny, in my opinion, but that's probably because the difference between the tones is a little great. Also, you would go in and make sub-selections. Turn that back on so you see it. You would probably pick two different colors, go in and make some sub-selections as well for more subtle things, especially like face tones and things like that. This is probably far too light for this kind of thing. But also, you don't have to use the entire gradient. You can start it before the selection and end it after the selection. You just get the middle of the gradient. So with a little practice and a lot of patience, you can teach yourself how to do this quite quickly, and you end up with what amounts to tone gradients inside your colors. And they're on their own layer, obviously, so you can adjust the layer type or whatever you need to do if you want to do something like that. You probably don't want to mess with that too much because we had to have this color match as best we could against the midtone. You might want to bring the opacity down just a little bit to get rid of any of this craziness. You may also end up having to go back in with the eraser, a nice soft eraser, opacity down quite a bit, and just go in and hit those areas that aren't quite, they're too sharp. It'll make it blend better. So that's one way to get a smooth gradient type transition. I prefer to paint my highlights and tones in by hand, but the stuff I do is generally fairly simple. I just use highlights, midtone, and shadow for one thing. I don't go with complex skin tones or anything like that. For that kind of stuff, I rely on digital painting, which is an entirely different method of coloring, which we covered a little bit on the meeting, but I'm thinking we're probably going to do like a full workshop on that at some point, so I'm not going to go into that here. But anyway, that's the gist of coloring comic books in Photoshop. There are probably tons of things I've missed, and I'm by no way breaking any ground here. I'm not even the best video for this that I've seen on YouTube, so if anything I've said has been too confusing or doesn't make sense or is wrong, let me know. We can both find better YouTube videos together, and I'd be glad to hear any comments you have. I'd like to thank the Sydney Comics Guild for letting me host that workshop. It was a lot of fun. I look forward to tabling with some of you guys at Supernova Comic Convention this year, and it's going to be great. So stay tuned here and on their Facebook page. There'll be all kinds of cool stuff coming up. We've got mini comics, we've got all kinds of projects. And this has been Nathan. Take it easy and keep making stuff.